Welcome to this Wise Owl Excel VBA tutorial. In this part of our series on writing SQL for Excel files, we're going to look at how to create nested subqueries. We'll begin with a quick recap of the basics of nesting queries to answer a simple question about your data, and then through most of the rest of the video we'll gradually add more levels of nested queries to answer more and more complicated questions about that same data. Towards the end of the video we'll have a quick look at how you deal with multiple values using the in operator, so let's get started. If you've watched any previous videos in this playlist, you'll probably be familiar with the basic setup by now, so feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter of the video where we'll get started with writing the code. If you haven't seen any previous videos, here's a quick look at the basic setup. We have a macro-enabled workbook which allows us to run a query by clicking on this button in the menu sheet, and when we do that it's going to extract some data from a separate Excel file called Movies. For this video, the Movies workbook contains a single worksheet called Film. I've got both these files stored in the same folder, and I'll drop a link in the video description so that you can download both files and follow along with writing the code with me if you'd like to. The code that's in the Nested Subqueries workbook relies on Microsoft ActiveX data objects, which isn't something I'm going to cover in this video. We already have a separate playlist which talks all about ActiveX data objects, and again I'll drop a link in the video description so that you can reach this easily. If this is the part you're interested in, then I'd recommend starting with the video called How Do I Get Data from a Closed Excel File Using VBA. Just to show the basics of how the code works, if we clicked the Run Query button on the menu sheet in the Nested Subqueries workbook, it triggers a subroutine called Create SQL Query. And the job of this subroutine is to construct the select statement that we then pass into a separate subroutine called Get Query Results. This subroutine deals with establishing the connection to the Movies workbook. It uses the query we've written here to populate the source property of a record set object, and then the rest of the code writes the results of that record set into a new worksheet in the same workbook. The query that I've already written here to get started with already uses a subquery to return the sum of the runtime column from all the films in the film worksheet. And I'm using the result of that subquery so that I can work out the contribution of each individual film's runtime to the grand total. So if we head back to the menu sheet in the Nested Subqueries workbook and click the Run Query button, we'll return a list of all of the films with the contribution that each film makes to the grand total of runtimes. Because we're returning all the films here, if I head down to the bottom of that column, so I've just clicked at the top, pressed the Control key and then the down arrow key, I could sum this column to find out whether it adds up to 1 or 100%. So I can either click the Auto Sum button or press the keyboard shortcut Alt and equals, and if I hit enter it shows me that the end result of that column, that sum, is exactly 1. Next, I'd like to change my query so that it only returns films whose budget is greater than the average budget for the entire film table. So to do that I'm going to head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and at the end of the From clause I'll concatenate a continuation character and then add a Where clause on the next line. So I'm going to ask where the budget field has a value that's greater than the average budget of all the films. So that means I'm going to need to have another subquery, and rather than write this all out again from scratch, I'm just going to quickly copy and paste my existing subquery and then just alter it so that I'm not looking for the sum, I'm looking for the AVG or average, and not of the runtime column but of the budget column. So having done that, I can head back to my menu sheet, click the Run Query button again and return a new list of films. I'll have fewer films this time, only 394 films as opposed to the 1200 which exist in the entire film table. And one other small problem now is that if I try to sum up the contribution to the total runtime using the Auto Sum button or the Alt and equals keyboard shortcut, I'll find that it no longer adds up to 1. You may remember if you watched the previous video in this series that the reason this happens is because the where clause that we've just added to our query only affects the rows in the outer main query. It doesn't affect the initial subquery that we wrote that returns the sum of runtime from the film table. So if we want to see how much each film's runtime contributes to the total runtime of films whose budget is greater than the average budget of all the films, we need to include this same where clause within the subquery in the select list. So again, to avoid having to write this out again from scratch, I'm just going to copy the entire where clause that we've just added, click inside the round brackets just after the from clause of our original subquery, paste that where clause in, and then if we head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, we'll find that we get the same number of results, so 394. And if we head down to the bottom of the percentage column or percentage contribution column, hit the auto sum button and press enter, we get the result of 1 again. So there's one example of nesting queries to multiple levels. In this particular example, we have one subquery to return the average budget, nested inside a subquery to return the sum of runtime, nested inside the main select statement, which returns the final set of results. So we've got 3 levels there. Now, according to Microsoft's specifications for Microsoft Access, which is basically the version of SQL that we're using here, there's a limit of 50 levels of nesting for individual queries. We're not going to go quite that far in this video, but we are going to go to a couple of extra levels to try to answer some more interesting questions about our data. To start with, I'm going to modify this query to return the details of a film whose budget is equal to the maximum budget from the film table. Or in plain English, I want to show details of the film with the biggest budget. So let's just change up a couple of things here. Let's change the where clause first of all. I'm going to say where the budget is equal to. And then I'm not going to use the average function, I'm going to use the max function to return the maximum budget from the film table. And then I don't really care about the runtime anymore, so I'm going to get rid of the runtime column that shows us the contribution to the total, and then let's return the budget field next to the title as well. Okay, so there's our starting point. We've got one level of nesting, I suppose, or 2 select statements in the same query. If we head back to the menu sheet and we run that query, there we go, the details of the most expensive film made in our database. Now I'd like to expand on this example to show all of the other films released in the same year as the most expensive film in our database. So the first step in doing that is to calculate the year that this film was released in. So we can do that by heading back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then rather than showing the title and the budget, let's change this so that it shows the year of the film's release date. I'm just going to tidy things up a little more as well. I'm going to get rid of these 2 separate columns here, and then bring everything back onto a single line for the select statement. And then I'm going to use the year function to calculate the year of the release date field. Okay, so having done that, we can just give that one a quick test. If we head back to the menu sheet and run that query, it returns the number 2011. Now I want to show a list of all the other films whose year of release date is the same as that. So we can head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we can convert this query into a subquery. So let's wrap a set of round brackets around the entire select statement. And then on the line above that, let's add a new select statement. I'll just fill in the concatenation and the continuation character first of all. And I'm going to say select. I'll cheat slightly and just use the asterisk to return all of the columns from the film sheet, and then add a where clause to ask where the year of the release date is equal to the year of the release date of the most expensive film in the database. So I'm just going to indent these 3 lines to try to make sense of this. And having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet again, click the Run Query button, and we're essentially returning a list of all the films made in the year 2011, although I guess in analytical terms we're returning a list of all the films released in the same year as the most expensive film in the database. So now we're up to 3 levels of nested queries, the same as we had in the previous example. What I'd like to do now is change the current set of results so that it shows the average budget of all the films released in the same year as the most expensive film in the database. I'm going to head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and I'm just going to tidy things up a little bit again. I want each individual select statement to occupy its own separate line. So I'm just going to tidy up a little. I'm going to take the select and from clause of the middle select statement onto the same line, and then I'm going to bring the where clause onto the same line as well. Then I want to take everything after the equals operator back down a line. So I'm going to close some double quotes and then concatenate a continuation character, indent that one space, and then open up some more double quotes. So we can hopefully see the levels of nesting a little more clearly like this. So rather than selecting all of the columns from the film table, where these conditions are true, I want to take away the asterisk and I want to say AVG, open and close some round brackets, and then refer to the budget field. So we're staying with the same number of levels, 3 levels of nested query. If we head back to the menu sheet and run the query again, we'll see the average budget of all the films made or released in the same year as the most expensive film ever made. So now that we've done this, I'd like to add another level of query to return a list of all the films whose budget is greater than the value we've just calculated. So the code to do that is fairly straightforward back in the Visual Basic Editor. Again, above the current list of select statements, we can add another select statement that's going to say select everything, select all the columns using the asterisk from the film sheet, where the budget field is greater than whatever we've just calculated using the current combination of subqueries. So I'll concatenate another continuation character and then indent all these lines one space. And then because this is now a subquery, I need to open up a set of round brackets at the beginning of the select statement and then close a set of round brackets at the end of the entire list. So what this is going to return, if we want the long-winded description, it's going to return a list of all the films whose budget is greater than the average budget of films released in the same year as the film with the biggest budget in the entire database. So if we head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, we'll see a list of all the films, basically, who has a budget greater than that figure. At this point you may have noticed that we're now returning films from multiple different years rather than just the year that the most expensive film was released in. And the reason for that is where the criteria which deals with the year is situated in our combination of nested queries. So the second level down is the query that contains the criterion based on the film's release date. The main query, the top level that we currently have, doesn't care about what year the film was released in, it just wants to find all the films whose budget is greater than whatever number this combination of queries returns. So if we want to find only the films released in the same year as the most expensive film ever made, whose budget is greater than the average budget of films made in the year or the same year as the most expensive film ever made, we need to repeat that same criteria for the main outer query. What's the best way to do this? I think if we copy and paste everything from the year function downwards, so whether it says year of release date and the next 2 levels of subqueries, making sure that we only include the 2 closed round brackets here. I'll copy that part to the clipboard. And then I'm going to concatenate a new continuation character. And then on the next line, heading back a couple of levels, I'm going to open some double quotes, type in an AND operator, and then paste in what I've just copied. Okay, so at that stage, no syntax errors, that's a good sign. I'll just take that space away there. So this additional criterion now applies to the outer query, the main one at the top of the list. So if we head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, we're now seeing a list of all the films made in the same year as the most expensive film ever made and whose budget is greater than the average budget of films released in that same year. So I think at this point we've probably added enough levels of nested query for you to get the idea. I think the danger of adding any more levels now is it will take me longer to describe what we're doing than it will be to actually do it. So there is one more thing I would like to quickly talk about, and that's what happens when your subqueries return multiple values. Everything we've done so far in terms of subqueries has returned just a single value. So I'm going to strip things back a little bit again just to demonstrate this point. I'm going to get rid of the additional criterion we've just added here and take this main combination of queries back to 2 simple levels. So I'm going to go back to something like this. So we're going to select everything from the film table, where the Oscar wins column contains a value that's equal to the maximum Oscar wins of everything in the film table. So basically we're showing the most successful films by Oscar wins. So having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet and run that query. And there we go, the 3 films with the highest number of Oscar wins. Now I'd like to change this query to show a list of all of the films made in the same year as any of these 3 films. So again, the next step in doing that is to calculate the year of the release date for each of these films. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor and we can change the asterisk here to say year and then in some round brackets, release date. So if we were to run this query just as a quick test, we'll see that list of 3 different years. And I want to see a list of films made in any of those 3. So we'll need to add another level of subquery. So let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor and open up some more double quotes. I'm going to concatenate the continuation character. And then I'm going to say select everything, or all the columns, from the film sheet where the year of the release date, and I can't just say equals here because I'm comparing the release date column with a list of values. I need to use an operator that can handle multiple values, so in is a good choice. I then need to wrap up my subqueries in a set of round brackets again, and just to suit my preferences I'm going to indent those 2 lines so we have this stepped layout of nested queries. So having done that, if I head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, we'll see a list of all the films made in any of the 3 years that the most expensive films, the most successful films by Oscar wins were released in. Hopefully again I haven't killed Excel at this point. Okay, so there we go. So we've got a list of all the films made in either 1998, 2003 or 1959. So there you go, there's how you nest multiple levels of queries to answer more complicated questions about your data. In the next video we're going to be looking at something called correlated subqueries, where things become even more complicated than this. So I hope you're looking forward to that one. Thanks very much for watching this one as always. See you next time.